But we need those dreams. And as poets, that power of the imagination lifts you into the realm of metaphor, which enables you to see, oh, that flower's blooming, even though it struggled up through a crack in the asphalt. Maybe I could do no less. Bring myself to get out of bed and bloom too through the cracks in the day, even though I think, oh, everything's horrible. No, there are cracks in the day. You can bloom.
Hey, and welcome back to episode 4 of the Poetry Vessel podcast. Today I have an extremely special guest who I hold very near and dear to my heart, Dr. Anne Buxie. Anne has a doctorate of philosophy in mythological studies with an emphasis in depth psychology from the Pacifica Institute in California. She was also the 4th Poet Laureate of Malibu. Anne is a poet, a writer, a storyteller, a dreamer, and very much a mentor to me, not just in poetry, but also generally in life. Most importantly, she is a close friend. Join us in this discussion as we talk about poetry, philosophy, form, and culture. And if you haven't already, click subscribe. Without further ado, enjoy the podcast. It's a good one. So Anne, thank you and Rick for inviting us into your beautiful home, and welcome to the Poetry Vessel podcast. We've been talking about this conversation for 2 years, and I'm glad it's finally happening. So
We've been talking for 2 years.
Yeah.
And we were talking before this show too, before this.
Yeah.
About form.
Form in poetry.
Yes, about form.
And you were talking about Ghazals.
Oh, Ghazals, and about how part of me resists being told to do something a certain way. Mm-hmm. Because what about my way? That's not important. But now I've begun to realize that forms and rules are wonderful. Just know that you don't have to follow them.
Yeah.
But take them under advisement, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that you can benefit from them. Sometimes, as you know, it's a form will confine you in a way that forces you to think about something differently. You want to say something, but you want to say it in this form. Well, that means you have to say it differently, which means you have to think about it differently, which is why we were saying, I think you agree, you like form too, but not all the time, right?
Yeah, one of the forms that I gravitate towards is haiku. And I think one of the things that I've learned the most with poetry is I think this works across the board, but you learn all these different rules of form and then you can break them. It's important to kind of learn where they come from and what constitutes that form, but then you can do what you want with it afterwards.
Yeah, I like the history, but that's like, for me, I like the history of words and know what you can do with the word and see how words have been so abused. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting to me, and to try and resuscitate their real meaning, like with, the word community, or so many words that have the prefix CO.
And what is it about community that you think requires resurrecting?
Well, community is like to serve together. Mm. People don't usually think of it like that. I don't think, and some people have a grudge against the word serve. Well, I don't want to be anybody's servant, or, that sometimes it strikes people wrong, but it really means just serve together, which means you've got to come together and figure out, well, what are we doing? And, come to terms about all of that, which requires, to serve together, you have to do that, to me. And that's how you build peace. Once you can agree on what you're serving, if it's not chaos, then you're on the way to, respecting each other and honoring each other. And
yeah, I think that's one of the things when you were Poet Laureate, you would consistently talk about community and the position as an act of service. And that's something that you passed on to me before I became Poet Laureate, and as you passed on the baton, so to speak, that I've thought of it in that context. I was like, okay, this is a position of service to others, but then also, as you're saying, the community, it's like everyone's serving each other.
And I find you really do that in the workshops, because to serve is to pay attention. And you do that really well, because people yearn to have somebody pay attention to me. Hey, I'm over here. And when people pay attention to you, it's as if, well, by George, I matter, at least for a moment, to that person. And that builds community, those small moments of mattering to each other, those moments where we attend to each other, builds community in surprising ways, I think, really surprising ways.
Yeah. And poetry itself is an art of attention. It's refining of paying attention to the world around you and other people and how you respond to phenomena in the world as well. So it's like attention is, especially in an age where our attentions can be so fragmented and all over the place, like even sitting right now to pay attention for, a long period of time is something that's increasingly scarce, I think, in our modern world.
My mind went off a couple different directions as you were talking about paying attention. Oh, paying attention is what gives you the material you need to write about. I mean, you have to have material, and to have material and dig deeply into the material, the deeper you dig into it, the deeper you pay attention to it, the more acute and the more truth you can get in your poetry. And to me, the whole world is a metaphor. So pay attention to anything. It doesn't matter what it is. Pay attention to it long enough and it'll teach you something about who you are.
I was reading something the other day. It's Owen Barfield's Poetic Diction, and he speaks about how, and I think this relates to your love of etymology, that the poet's recovering the lost meaning of words through the creation of metaphor. So it's to bring what was originally understood by the ancients back into like the consciousness of the day. So it's like you're creating the connections that maybe used to be there but have been lost over time.
Yeah, they're still there. We just aren't taught about them. We're not taught to pay attention to them. They're still there. You put that really beautifully, because those metaphors are alive and they are still there. One thing that helps me in this day and age with what we're experiencing in our country and the politics, the culture, everything, is rhythms. The rhythms of surge and ebb and flow, and the sun rising and setting. Those natural rhythms are reflected in our own lives. I mean, things rise in the political realm, in the cultural realm, in between with husband and wife. You have those, ebbs and flows. And that helps me in these times. It keeps me grounded to know that the way things are right now is not going to last.
Yeah.
There's an ebb and a flow going on. It's not going to last the way it is now. I don't need to think, oh, I'm ruined forever. It doesn't work like that. So how can I be part of the flow in these times in a good way? I get a magazine from the University of Arizona, and they just hired someone as head of their medical department. This guy's from Morocco, raised in Canada, educated here, partly educated here, and he talked about culture, the culture of a place. And he said it's easier to do that because when he was hired to be president, there were several positions unfilled. And he got to fill them with people he knew would affect and help create a new culture of the place. And I think as poets, it's our responsibility to do that, to contribute to the culture of the community in which we live. As Gandhi said, be the change you want to see. Well, poetry, we have to be the change we want to see in our community, which ripples out to other communities, especially if it's attractive. I mean, if we create an attractive place to be because we're doing whatever it is you have to do to be attractive, which to me is, doing good. And it really comes down to love in any other way. I mean, you don't do good without loving what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was so beautifully put. And I was thinking, even when you were talking about rhythms, like at the moment, we have, for example, artificial light pollution everywhere. We have, we can look up and barely see any stars because we have so much, we're so concerned with creating light. And I mean, we're even sitting with lights on where we are. We're so concerned with this artificiality, but I always wonder what these things are doing to our rhythms, a little bit like how a moth is meant to follow the moonlight, but there's lights everywhere that the moths, they're
and how
confused.
We need the dark.
Yeah.
We need night, for Pete's sakes. Oh, I mean, my eyes just want to cross when I think of light all the time, Yeah, it's a relief to have night come and to go into that realm that my husband loves. Rick, you love to dream.
That's right.
I mean, it's why Rick said he won't go out with me because he has more fun at night with his dreaming. He he has more, right? You said that.
Maybe.
You did say it. You have more fun in your dreams, you said sometimes. So, but we need those dreams. And as poets, we need to nurture that nightlife among us. It's that power of the imagination, dreaming, the imagination that lifts you into the realm of metaphor, which enables you to see, that flower's blooming. And it means that even though it struggled up through a crack in the asphalt, maybe I could do no less.
Yeah.
And bring myself to get out of bed and bloom too through the cracks in the day, even though I think, everything's horrible. No, there are cracks in the day. You can bloom. Anyway, Rachel, what are you smiling? You're smiling.
I'm just enjoying myself. Enjoying listening to you too.
I was thinking, you brought up imagination, and I was thinking about this yesterday. I'm like, when you are in a more imaginative or dream state, it's kind of like a candle goes on in your head. And when you can capture that, in any art, but I'm thinking about it in terms of poetry, when you can capture that in language so well, if your poem meets a receptive imagination, I think that light kind of transfers to the poem and then can transfer to the reader, and you kind of switch on, speaking of illumination, like a type of imaginative illumination in the reader. So one of the things I've been thinking about as the poet's role is to also enchant your community and your readers by feeling enchanted yourself and learning the craft and parts and parcels of expressing yourself clearly and with metaphor.
And to enchant, to enchant us all. I so agree.
Do you know where the word enchantment comes from? I don't.
Oh, I have my dictionary.
Oh,
right
you've got
here.
that? Okay, let's get it.
Oh, what a
We've
surprise!
got props.
What a surprise! Enchant. I know what enchant. To charm by sorcery. It says by sorcery, but I take it as by imagination because sorcery has such odd overtones to me.
How about magic?
Yeah, that's better. So it's a charming though. It's to charm someone instead of preaching at them or beating them over the head. Charming someone is such a nicer way to approach someone when you're trying to make the world a better place. It's better than approaching someone and saying, no, you're doing that all wrong.
Yeah.
You got to do it this way. Yeah. I love that word charm.
Yeah.
That comes from enchanting. Yeah. You were right on with that, Nathan.
And you made me think, like, when you write the poem, it's like you don't want the poem to be like talking down at someone. It's more an invitation, and I like to think of it as an invitation to dialogue, because once you switch on that imagination, then the conversations you have with each other, I think, tend to have a much, more depth in them.
And you want them to feel with you, which is the difference between thinking and feeling, because feeling does condition to some degree what you think about. Mm-hmm. If I'm pissed off, we're going to have a different conversation. If I don't like you, if I'm pissed off at you.
Yeah.
But if we're all welcoming here, it's another kind of conversation, perhaps a more charming one.
But that also comes with, rhythm and harmony. These are things that you can put into art, and that also comes out in conversation. When you're fully in rhythm and you feel harmonious with the person you're speaking to, that's when I think the most realizations can occur, because you're going back and forward more fluidly, listening attentively and carefully, so that you can choose the right language to respond in a way that increases resonance.
That also deepens, because to me, we want to always go deeper and awaken more of our consciousness, because consciousness is huge, and we live in maybe this tiny little sliver of it and think, oh, I'm awake. Ooh, well, yeah, okay, you're a little bit awake, but consciousness is so huge. So to me, a poet, by what he does, or an artist, any artist, the way they express themselves, I hope serves to arouse people's consciousness and enlarge it. I mean, that's why I love how the Tibetan Buddhists describe the elements, because they knew the elements were conscious. In fact, they named Buddhas of each element. They named them. And so you get the feeling, oh, these are conscious beings. And the Buddha of space, when I looked up space etymologically, it's that which enlarges. Mm-hmm. Oh, you mean I don't have to sit on this tiny little head of a pin thinking this is my only thought I'll ever have, and I need to defend this opinion? No, space wants you to enlarge your view, your perspective. Anyway, that's just fascinating to me, how we want to expand our consciousness all the time.
Yeah.
And just in talking to you now, I realize that we all need that expansion. We live in what we think is a conscious state, but there's so much more.
I think what you were saying, it came across really clearly. I read your PhD thesis that you wrote in 2008 for your PhD in mythological studies with depth psychology, called Logosynthesis. And in it, you talk about a phenomenological engagement with the world and with the elements. The way I read into it was like, to respect what water and fire and air and earth really are, you need to enter a conversation with it. And part of entering that conversation with nature is to like open your heart and ears and eyes to like what it's showing you. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about logosynthesis. And
well, I think you just explained it, and I think that this is an opportunity, this particular time, after all these wildfires and so much destruction, is an opportunity as we rebuild, to rebuild differently, with an ear to the elements, to nature, because we can't keep living like this. It's not working real well, because we have a whole bunch of chaparral out there that didn't burn this time, but it's gonna. And do I want to keep living like that? Or is there a way we can listen to the earth, and what does it take to manage our relationship with the earth we live on in a way that we can not suffer the way we have recently? I mean, there are ways to do it, I'm convinced. We just need to put our will there. We need to have the will to do it. Dick Gregory said something about about racism that was funny. He said racism, the problems have existed for a long time. What we have is we don't have the will to resolve them. We have the resources, but we don't have the will to resolve them. Well, I hope that Malibu has the will to resolve some of these problems that keep showing up. I mean, we don't want to live. And then Rick and I drove into Westwood the other day. Of course, PCH is closed. Took over 2 hours to get there.
Yeah.
And we look at all these people in the car going 5 miles an hour, passing the speed limit sign that says 65 miles. But people live like, this is not civilized. It's not civilized to live like that. So we need to just rebuild differently, radically rebuild too. And radical means, radical etymologically is to go to the root. So don't do a superficial fix. Go to the root of what our needs are. Because my needs, I need to breathe clean air, drink clean water, eat clean food on the earth. I mean, I think everybody needs that. So are we going to continue to poison the earth by how we live on it? Because we use toxic materials in building our homes. So when they burn, it goes in the air and the water and the earth. And so we're recycling these toxins. So I just think it's quite an opportunity. And in a way, I feel that this is a time of incubating a new beginning. And I looked up what incubate means etymologically. It's to lie down on. To lie down on, like birds lie down on their eggs. So what I'm thinking is, it required, I looked in the I Ching too, and the message for January, February was fascinating. It talked about resting to get the energy, to restore the energy you need to make that turn, which was fascinating because maybe that's why I want to lie down so much. I want to rest a lot. But we need that when we're restoring energy to ourselves to develop the plan, to develop the energy we need to make that turn, to process what it is we need to do even, because we can't keep living this way. So if we're going to live a different way, you got to go, oh, well, now what?
Yeah.
So it's just fascinating to me. The I Ching even gives that instruction for these times, and I thought it very pertinent to these particular times. Rest, restore energy.
You made me think with that, it's like, there's so many issues we have in the world, and if we want to find...
Oh, I don't have any issues.
If you want to find solutions to an issue, you need to first ask the right questions. And I think, speaking of incubation, if you want to get to, it's like we almost like go way too solutions first, way too quickly. And if you think like that, you make more mistakes because you've got to consider things from so many different viewpoints and angles. So to relate it also to poetry, it's like one of the tasks that poetry is, and I shared a quote by Lucille Clifton recently, it's you're there to ask more questions than to give answers, because one of the skills that you're cultivating is, how do I ask a good question that probably leads to more questions? Because nothing is cut and dry or as easy as, you hear a lot of people, you'd say, you either are like this or you're like this. There's only two outcomes and you pick one and that's it. It's like, nothing's like that. Things require a 360 degree,
So asking the questions means that you're going to do a lot of listening. So that's what we're in for, to me, to come up with a better building back, or whatever they're calling it, rebuilding, whatever they're calling it. But that to me is what we're in for, asking a lot of questions, and some of them will be more right than others. But any question anyone has bears fruit, I think, if it makes you think a little bit. That's all. Just think and feel. The feeling is so important too, because when you're talking to people who are already angry, it's kind of difficult to get them to think, because the anger predisposes you to think in a certain way. I mean, I read a study on this. I mean, certain feelings actually predispose your thoughts in certain ways, and we've all felt this. So, so we have to always consider the feeling, and there's so much to consider, you know. And at any rate, poets are it's an art form, but it's a responsibility. We do have a responsibility to take care and to try and nourish community, which means taking care in so many ways, you know, being sensitive to people's needs and their feelings, and then digging deep into our own thoughts and feelings so we can express them in a way that it might be new, whatever. You know, we always talk about wanting to, don't use that simile, it's old or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
Think of new stuff. Well, to me, it's powerful if it comes right from how you felt. It's powerful. I mean, we're going to reuse words. So yeah, artists have quite a job. Yeah.
Yeah. You made me think that Emerson once said that language is fossil poetry, that at one point all words were poetry in themselves because they were created at one point. So created like a poem. So over time, it's like we keep having to like write these longer things to bring, you know, the poetry back into language. And one of the things I think of that is a lot of poetry talks to poets or people already interested in poetry. And I always try to think about how do we engage people that are maybe not yet aware that they would like poetry if they came across it, or just to satisfy where they might feel curious about it into then enjoying it. I wonder like what the job of the poet is in order to bring what they learn from expressing poetry and dialoguing with it, and how they can bring that to people that aren't necessarily as associated with it.
You know, when you're revealing the truth, I think that's powerful. Revealing the truth. I want to read something that I don't know if he was a Mayan poet or not.
What's his name?
Humberto Ak'abal. It was written first in, I think, Quechua, and then translated to Spanish, and now translated into English. But it's just such a short poem and so beautiful. It's called The Fire. The fire crouches. He eases the log's sadness by singing his burning song. The log listens. So consumed, he forgets he was ever a tree. Isn't that beautiful? Just a nice, beautiful way to look at these changes that happen. I mean, we might find a song now that we're listening to that comes to us through a metaphor or something happening in nature or anywhere that will make us forget who we were in order to, you know, forget who we were, forget the grudges we were holding on to, so that we will enter into this new song. I just love that. It's such a short poem. It's so beautiful. The log listens, so consumed he forgets he was ever a tree. Yeah, anyway.
It made me think of as a human, if you're going into a poem or, like you said, a piece of art, like you forget who you were and become who you are in the next kind of present moment. And I think about like the strongest aspects of art will change us. I like to think of them as like they're almost like hands, and they can reach into us and reconstitute a little bit, and we come out hopefully refreshed, revitalized, or with a new perspective.
You know, that's beautiful. In a way, we do have to forget some of these ways we've been living and create this new way of being, create this new beginning. We do have to forget that. maybe it was some of your emotions that you used when you were speaking that helped me get that. I think it's important maybe that we do need to make that break to enable us to, to move on and to grow our consciousness, really let that consciousness crack open.
Yeah.
I think of the dawn, the dawn, that crack of dawn. So thanks, Nathan.
Yeah.
It's been fun talking to you. Oh, Rachel, what do you think? Did you have any thoughts about some of this stuff?
I think with the last poem you shared, it made me think. It made me think about our connectivity, or what you forget. When people talk about, that we're all like stardust or something, or we're all part of the universe, you forget that you're part of that. So it's like you forgot your origin. Is kind of an interpretation I had with that poem. That we're all connected.
Right. We forgot we were ever stardust. Mm-hmm. How did we do that? I always love to think about hydrogen and oxygen. And when they decided to get together, that was a surprise. We're not air anymore. What is this? We're flowing. Help, help. I'm drowning. Yeah. That's very interesting to read this with you poets, to read that little poem with you poets, because I saw it differently. Mm-hmm. Especially with what you just said now too, Rachel. Forgetting that we were ever stardust. And to remember that is to go back to our roots in a way. It's a radical act. Radical means going to the roots. So it's a radical act to forget who we are now and remember all we could be, maybe, all we were, all we could be. It's a new beginning. Anyway, it's fascinating these times, so fascinating.
And I just even saw it play out. It's like metaphor begets metaphor. Like you read that and the metaphors come up. Like that's why we all have these different interpretations, yes. Because we're now imaginatively engaged through the act of art.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is art is an act. It enacts within us when we are part of it. We become part of it, and it becomes part of us when we, we enter. What's it? I think it's Jane Hirschfield. It's like you enter the mind of poetry. Like you enter it as. Like, speaking of consciousness, it's like its own consciousness, and you kind of like open the doorways, and you enter it, and it enters you, and it's this interesting kind of back and forth that you can have.
It makes it seem like a lot more fun to enter that space now, that space of expanding consciousness with all kinds of possibilities that are there. We just have to, you did this with your hands, we just have to grab onto some of them and make them ours. Use our imagination. How can we make this mine? And yeah, anyway, thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
I'm glad you I'm glad you said something.
When you were talking about like hand movements, I like thinking of it as like, it's for evidence of metaphor. When you're talking, all your hand movements, all your body language, you are enacting metaphors all the time, because you're like, imagine that this is this, and you cast straight to it, and it's easier to follow, and you don't realize sometimes how often communication is non-verbal. Like most communication is non-verbal, which is quite ironic that we're talking about poetry, that there's like so much non-verbal element to it. And it's a little bit of advice I like to give poets when they're stuck for finding the right word. I'm like, do the action. Like when the example I give is like when I go into the kitchen, I usually forget the word for what it is and even the object, but I'll know the emotion. It's like I need a spoon. So I'll go in, I'll go, where's the, and Rachel, you get this all the time. Sometimes I'm like, what's the, and I'll be so bad with trying to explain the thing that I want, and you're like, I have no idea what you're asking me. I'm like, I know, like language, I said this to you earlier, right? I was like, language doesn't do what you want it to do most of the time. So there's other ways of like coming to an idea or like what it is that you need that is conceptual but non-languaged.
And then as poets, to finally distill that into language,
Yeah.
to pass it on.
Find language which is beyond itself, I think.
Find language that's true to the feeling, though. Because to me, still, that's what attracts people. When there's a truth revealed that you can feel, not just think about, think, oh, that makes sense, but you feel it. You don't even have to think it makes sense because it's hit you. It's hit you before you can even think it.
You said, here's one, you said makes sense. And as you know, poetry, poesis, it means making, and you are making or creating sense by writing it or reading it or listening to it.
And to me, I hope it smacks of truth.
Yeah.
I mean, that is what comes and just hits you before you even can think about, I mean, if you look at someone and your first opinion of them is, well, they look a little suspect. And then they start talking and they say something that's so truthful it hits you before you can even shut it down by the opinion that you had formed of them. It's so interesting. These opinions we carry around that do prevent a lot of stuff from getting in. And that's why these truths, that the closer we can get as poets to expressing a truth, that in a way that you can feel it, not just think it, but feel it. And you do that really well with your images.
Thank you.
Nathan, which I'm glad. Don't you think he does it really well with his images, Rachel?
Definitely. I love Nathan's images in his poetry.
Thank
and all
you.
your writing.
Yeah.
And I love when you have shared a poem in the workshops.
Me too.
Yeah.
Speaking of, do you have a poem with you that you've written?
A haiku, I remember a haiku. I think I told it to you. I may not be what I was, but I'm becoming what I've never been, which is good for these times.
Yeah. And that, I think, goes with, generally the passage of time, but when we tackle that idea, or not tackle, when we enact that idea more consciously, what you are becoming is, I guess, speaking of the space, is more expansive, I would hope, and more self-aware and more aware of others and more, sensibility for your community.
It takes into account, I may not be what I was, takes into account that people often expect you to be a certain way. Well, I may not be that way anymore, which is like a warning. I may not be what I was, but I'm becoming what I've never been. That's what we want to do as a community, become what we've never been, because maybe we've never dared imagine it or never dared think it was possible. Well, let me tell you, it is. Imagine it and make it happen. It sounds so easy, but in a community, when you can imagine together too, I think we can make things happen. I think we can.
And I like that we're talking about imagination. Like, imagination often gets seen as it's just something you have, but you're either so good at it or you're not. And I would say that, we all have imagination, but I think it's also something that you can learn. I think that's what all of so much of art and poetry and paying attention to the world and creating metaphors and increasing your ability to think metaphorically and symbolically, or at least be aware when it's happening, makes your imagination stronger. So I think of when you have a child, you read them fairy tales or rhymes because it's cultivating their imagination.
Right.
So I think imagination can be cultivated.
And poetry helps cultivate it because it's a muscle we all have. But if you don't know you have it, never use it. But so poetry cultivates it, I think. And I do think we need to cultivate it, that poetic sensibility.
Well, that's one thing I wanted to ask, if you're okay with another question, was that's the term you would use for me, and that's something that I've, inherited and adopted, the fashioning of a poetic sensibility in yourself and within the community. Like, can you just speak a little bit about what you mean by poetic sensibility?
Well, we've really covered it. It's using the imagination to create to build a better future. I mean, whatever those catchphrases are they're using, but it's to not let yourself be limited by what the culture says, oh no, that can't be done. Well, as I've said, we can't keep living this way. So we have to figure out another way. And I think the imagination helps us do that. I mean, I'd like to see a walking path the length of Malibu. Literally a walking path with things along the way where you could stop and maybe talk to people, have a little cover, a shade in the summer, because we need to nourish community. And I mean, to do that, you have to have places where people can get out and be together and run into each other. Vintage Market turned out to be one of those places in the fire. And I was thankful for, people would gather there in the morning and you could get stuff there because they had generators. But we just need more gatherings. And I think poetry gatherings and storytelling gatherings are both important because they're focused on helping us express how we feel and using our imagination to see what it is we want to become. Like, why does it matter that I get up in the morning? If it doesn't matter, then why am I getting up? And if I get up, then I got to make it matter somehow. So to me, poetry, group, storytelling, they help us delve into that.
Yeah.
And that's what we want if we want to affect the culture of the place where we live. And I think we have a duty to affect the culture simply because we're part of it. Not just to make chaos in it, but to improve it. Make it stronger. I don't want to say improve, that sounds judgmental, but we want to make it stronger in ways, to me, that serve the good of all.
Yeah.
The common good, you could say. So.
You make me think, I've not thought of this as a term before, but like a re-interiorization of imagination, because we live in a world with so many screens and television and YouTube, and so many things are dreaming for us on the exterior. And we can, not that there's not beautiful films that do engage your imagination and things, but once it's being projected at you, it's like you can lose your own ability to find what is within you. I think it was Carl Jung that said, like, people are so terrified. It's like people will do yoga and put all of their different kind of focuses outside of themselves, but they're terrified of what might come out of their own soul. But if something does come out of your own soul, I don't think you're terrified of it anymore, because you've allowed it. It's not unknown. You've allowed it to well up and out. And I think that's one of the important things about art and poetry. It's like you're pulling out of your soul, and I think ideally it's a soul speaking to soul. If you get to what you're saying, the truth.
Yeah, well, it can be terrifying to some people, I'm sure, but hopefully it happens because we're trying to get to the root of why it matters to me to get up in the morning. Why it matters, that's, the meaning. I guess you could say that the meaning of your life, what's it mean? Or I like the word matter too. I mean, Dad used to say something like, what do you make of that? Exactly. What are you going to make of today? And then another storyteller from Minnesota, a fourth generation farmer, he died a few years ago. But he used to say, now what? And I love that. Well, now what? Now you're in this pickle, now what? Yeah, that's a great question. And then follow it up with what do you make of it? Yeah, I mean, we're not just going to, I listen to The Lord of the Rings at night often. I've taped all their episodes, about 15 hours of it or however many, but I listen to it. But we want to tap into our strength and learn to share our strength and let that be part of a communal strength so that we can create something as a community that is stronger and standing up for the good of all.
And you're saying about, even waking up that you're going to your roots. And what's a root doing if not reaching down, spreading out, pulling up water and nutrients? Like what is at the root is, I think part of it's like remembering what is good and what you need to do, as you said, to then get up in the morning. Like why?
Well, and it helps you can't get up without roots.
Yeah.
Because they strengthen they're gripping the earth. And the earth to me, metaphorically, would be your faith, your moral grounding. And the moral grounding is formed first in your family. This is how we do things around here in this family. And is it done with kindness and consideration, or do you beat each other up? But that's where you first learn. That's where you're first grounded in how we do things. And then, of course, we get into the wider world. But an experience like when I went back to school, the first class I had was Hinduism, then Buddhism. And I thought, oh my, this is fun. Exposed to these different approaches to faith. So that deepened my roots more.
Yeah.
Deepened the Christian roots that had started that way. So kind of lost track of what I was saying, but the roots are important, and the moral grounding is what I was getting at.
Yeah.
The moral grounding is evidently, from what I've read, it's severely lacking in our schools. And we need that there. Of course, we need it in families too when we're being raised. But we need a moral grounding. I couldn't help but think of what happened in France recently, coincidentally with our election. And it's a synchronicity because these two things happened, but I formed a meaningful connection between them, and that made it a synchronicity. France convicted 51 men of. You probably heard about that. The 51 men. What did we do here? We elected one president. What? Am I in this world? What country am I living in? That's where we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at any rate, that synchron, and then the European court just reversed a decision made by a French court of appeals saying that a woman has a right to decide if she wants to have sex or not. So you mean it's not a transaction that when you marry, you have to just do it all the time, whenever? They decided a woman, I'm thinking, well, thank you. Thank you. Now it was fascinating to read that though, because it shows how women have been objectified and commodified. Oh, and that's huge. That's a huge. Well, it's a huge problem. It's part of our moral grounding because of the spread of pornography, and the damage it's doing. So I didn't mean to get into all that. I'm sorry. It's just that there's so much that we have to do to reground ourselves morally, and we're not helping ourselves. In some cases, we're not helping ourselves very much.
Yeah. You were saying, and I kind of brought back to the phrase of it starts at home. It's like, who are you in the context when it's, for example, just me with Rachel? Who are you when it's you and your spouse? Who are you with your immediate family or your parents or your offspring?
Yeah.
It's like things start there. And if you want to get out and increasingly make, widespread, positive, conscious changes in the world, it's like you better start, I guess, with yourself first, but you better start at home and then go out. I think that there's, you see it all the time, that maybe a well-loved celebrity figure, and then it comes out all the stuff that's been going on behind the scenes, and it's like the persona that you wear in public can be so thick and so deceiving of everyone, when behind closed doors you're doing some bad stuff. So you made me think about, it's like, who are you in the smaller moments, or the moments of your life where the eyes aren't on you? And when you're a better person, or you do good there, I think you're better able to then spread that and outwards.
When you receive love, it inspires you to give more. It's just so wonderful how that just rolls on like that. Yeah, well, we've touched on a thorny enough subject right there.
Yeah.
But the culture is fascinating. And when you get married, you realize that now you two are creating your own culture, because you're from one family with one culture. I mean, each family has its own culture. Forget about it. Then you marry and you got to form another culture. And it's great. But I mean, that's part of the building that we do in building a relationship.
We're synthesizing, like metaphors, two separate things, or that appear separate, into marriage.
Right, and that creates its own culture where all these elements, understanding and respect, and all of that we learn. That's why the last story I wrote was about my husband's family, because before Rick's mom died, she told me that she had 15 brothers and sisters, and in their little town in Oklahoma, the townspeople used to call them blue hen chicks. She didn't know what they meant. I asked her. So she died, and I looked it up. It packs a hell of a wallop. I know what it means now. So I wrote a story about it.
Will you share what it means?
Well, yeah, I will tomorrow. No, I'm gonna probably share it again tomorrow in the story workshop. But it's just fascinating to dig into our past and our history, even to dig into the place we come from, England. But more than England, dig into the particular place where you live.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know it, but my dad and mom were from Pekin, Illinois. I knew that, but I didn't know it was a sundown town. I didn't know what that was. My dad told my husband that, but obviously before Dad died, he told my husband that. He never told me that. I didn't need to know. But do you know what a sundown town is? If you're black, you can't be here after sundown, or you will pay consequences. Yeah.
I didn't realize how nefarious that was. It sounded.
Oh, well, that was a hotbed.
It
was a hotbed of KKK activity in that area.
Wow.
Illinois and yeah, can't be here or they will get you. So, and I didn't know that. And so when we dive back into the place where we're from and we see that culture was present, that was part of the culture. I'm not saying everyone felt that way necessarily, but it was part of the culture. So it was an influence, should I say, on. So it's just interesting to me to discover all these influences that families have weathered, dependent on the place they're from, and and then how they're raised and all that. So it's fascinating to me to dig into our histories.
Yeah.
So I hope you dig into your history more, and I hope you do too, Rachel. Dig into your specific history and find, because there are things you might find out about, well, why am I this way? Well, you can find out I've kept some things my grandfather wrote that explained to me what he was like, and it just helps. Yeah.
Do you find it gives you more like answers for some of how you behave, or maybe, as we were saying before, deepening certain questions that you weren't kind of
Well,
aware
he was
of
a man of faith, I know that. And so it's just, when you look at it from the perspective of culture and what raised you, because your culture raises you, the people who this is the way we do things. That's the culture. This is the way we do things. And the people who raise you do it a certain way, and they pass on certain attitudes. And they influence, of course, what you believe about yourself and the world. So, yeah, it has affected me. I know it has. I can't say specifically, but I know. And then you marry, like hydrogen and oxygen, and then, whoa!
I was thinking about that in terms of like alchemy. You have the alchemical wedding between the sulfur and the mercury, and you're looking to create the philosopher's stone and the ideal, I guess, of bringing two things together, which is simultaneously metaphorical, but also,
Well, you and
enacting.
Rachel created a bit of gold, I'd say.
We're trying.
Oh,
Hopefully
you're
not
doing
fool's
that.
gold is a...
No, not fool's gold. It's beautiful to see a relationship blossom, which is, I hope, it continues to do throughout all your lives and our lives, Rick and me, because don't want to ever come to this standstill. There's consciousness still to open. It always will be.
Space still to be had.
Yeah, to grow into.
And I was thinking, like, at the root, is it love that you're looking to?
Well, I think it comes back to that. I say, I knew before the election that no matter who won, didn't change what my duty was. My duty was to do good, period. However I could do. I mean, it's going to look different when I do good than when you do good, because we're different people. And to me, doing good is another way of saying loving. I don't like to use the word too much because people think, oh, there she goes again, talking about love.
Hippie.
But it comes back to that.
Yeah.
Because I've often thought, I don't want people to like me. I want them to love me. That goes a little deeper.
Give this video love then.
Yeah, give this video some love. The Poetry Vessel podcast some love. Well, Anne, thank you so much. I'm so glad that we were able to do this.
Oh, I love you and Rachel.
Love you too.
Yeah.
Said at the same time. The sulfur and mercury have definitely conjoined. Any last words, Rachel?
No, great job, guys. We're at right at an hour right now. So
Wow.
well done.
All right.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
So see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Yeah.